Hi and welcome to today's video. For today, we'll actually be covering the basics of Python programming. This is actually beginner friendly, so it's actually advisable that if you're a complete beginner, this is actually the right video for you. So on today's video, we'll actually be covering variables and the most common data types in Python. And we'll actually be using VS Code. So let me open my code editor. So after opening your code editor, you'll go ahead and click on File on your top left, then look for the Open folder and click on Open folder. Since we are writing code, you actually want to keep all your code in a central place, which makes it easier for you to locate it whenever you need. So you can actually create a folder. In my case, I've already created a folder. So I'll just click on Python, then click on Select Folder, and it should open. So as you can see on this panel, the folder is actually empty. So you'll actually start by creating a Python file. I know that some of you might be new to this. So how do we create a Python file? You'll go ahead and right click. Then as you can see, the first option is new file. So click on the new file. After clicking on the new file, you have to choose the name you want to give your file. In my case, I'll be using the name main. Then to tell your code editor that you're referring to a Python file, you need to end with a .py. You can actually note that the icon changes. Let me show you. You can see the icon now versus the icon after I read the .py. This icon symbolizes Python. So after doing that, just click on enter. So you successfully created a Python file. And after clicking on enter, it should open your file. So as I started by mentioning, you'll actually be covering variables. So what are variables? Variables are containers for storing data values. So they basically store data values. How do we have already known what a variable is. So how do we create a variable? You start by choosing a name that you want to give your variable. I'll start by using X. Then use the equal sign. So this equal sign is used when creating variables. And now since you've said that variables are containers for storing data, we actually need to give some data for it to store. And what do we mean by data? A data can be a number or a name. So I'll start by writing a number. Let's say x equals 4. You can create another one. Let's say y equals 6. Maybe c equals 7. So when creating variables, it's not a must for you to use a single letter. Like in our case, we've only used X, Y, C, which are all single letters. You can actually use a full name. Let's say name. So a name, for you to write a name, you need to do this. Add a quotation mark, then add your name. Let's say John. You can use a full name such as age. Let's say 7. Year 2023. Can actually see. So you're not limited to using a single letter. You can use a single letter, you can use a full name, anything you want. But we'll actually look at the guidelines that you're supposed to follow when creating a variable. So there's something we need to note when creating variables. So we'll start by covering the guidelines for creating a variable. So number one, Okay, before we cover the guidelines, there's something known as commenting. You might actually be familiar to what commenting is. It's basically writing, let's say, a short sentence which gives you an idea or maybe airs your views about a certain point. So in Python, we also have commenting. But in our case, commenting in Python is actually used to give some short notes that give us the idea of what the code is doing. Let's say your code is multiplying, but now you want to tell the user, the person reading your code, for it to be easier. So what do? You comment. So by commenting, this tells Python that when you reach this line, you don't, this is a sentence for the user to read, meaning that it won't be executed, meaning that the code won't run that part. So how do we comment? We comment by using an hashtag. Let me locate mine. Yes. You can even see that the color changes to green. So let's say I want to create a variable. I'll just say variable that stores my name. Then I'll just come here and write name, then give it a name. So as you can see, it actually gives us an explanation of what the code is doing. What is the code doing? It states that the variable stores my name. And as you can see, I've written name, then Victor. So whenever I run this file, when the code editor reaches to this point on this, in my case it's line 9, it doesn't execute. It skips this and goes to the next, since it knows that these are short notes. So this is what commenting is. So next, we'll actually give the guidelines of how to create a variable. In our case, I'll be using the commenting. So let me go ahead. So by commenting, this line won't be ran by the code. Guidelines for creating variable. You can see the color even changes to green, meaning that it won't be carried out. So number 1, a variable can start with a number. What does this mean? I'll give an example. So basically, you can't write like 1, then name. This is wrong. So you can't start a variable with a number. As you can see in the example I've given. So guideline number 2, variables are case sensitive. What do you mean by case sensitive? When we say case sensitive, this is where a variable can have a capital letter and a small letter. So in our case, let me give an example. If you created 2 variables, name and name. These are two different variables, meaning that name and name are not the same. Since this one starts with the capital N, when this one starts with the small n. So according to Python, these are two completely different things. Then a variable must start with a letter or an underscore. Must start letter or an underscore. This is actually easier to understand. Let me give an example. So it can start by a letter in this refers to the cases up here. Name, this starts with the letter X, Y, C, both start with the letter. So for the underscore part, the underscore refers to this sign. So let's say name. So if I come here and write name, so this sign is the underscore. So you can see it doesn't give us any error. You can see it actually doesn't give us any error. So it can start with a letter in this case, or it can start with an underscore. And those are the guidelines. So we've already known what variables are. We've known how to create a variable, and we've known the guidelines of creating a variable. But before we dive into data types, there's something else you need to note. You can actually assign multiple values in variables. As we started, we actually assign a single variable to a single data. A single variable to a single data. But you can actually do for multiple variables and assign them multiple values. So how do we do this? So I want to, let me comment this. Assigning multiple values. Multiple values. So in our case, let's say I'm a student and the system needs to get my name, age, and the year I'm in. So if I want to do all this in a single line, I'll just come and write name, age, and year. Then come here and write name, Frida, then age 20, then year I write 2000. You can actually see. So on this line, we've actually assigned multiple values, but here we were assigning single values. Other than assigning values to variables, we can actually show the output of a variable. So how do we output a variable? This is basically through print. So print helps you give an output of a variable, or let's say any word that you put inside here. So we actually want to test this. I'll delete this. Just this. So let's say you want to show the user the data that you have. In our case here, we created name, age, and year. So let's say I want to show the name. So if I run this, to run your code, you just click on this button, which is on your top right. Click on run, and the output should be here. Yes, you can actually see the name is Frida. And in our case, the way this data follows each other here is the same way it follows each other when we were writing the variables. So the first variable name is assigned to the first data, the second variable age is assigned to the second data 20, and the third variable year is assigned to the third data. And so you can print each or even all. So by printing, we output the value. So we can also print all of them. We can print more than one data. Let's say name, age, and year. Can actually see, but you can see that it actually separates each with a space. So for this, you are covering outputting output variables. So when printing, it's not a must for you to use the variables. You can also print text that is not in a variable. Let's say you want to print. This is actually the most common hello world. As you can note, we have not assigned it to a variable. It's just their text. So you can see if I run this, you can see it also prints hello world. So it's not a must for you to use a variable. It can either be a variable or you can insert the data without a variable, which can be a word or a number. So let's go and dive into most common data types. So by most common data types, I'm not referring to all the data types. We'll have an in-depth video on the data types in the next episode. Most common data types. So what are data types? We say that our variables store values, but we can actually categorize this value in terms of which type it is. So by categorizing the data inside the variables is where we get the data types, meaning that a variable can have data that is of different type. So which are these types of data? So I'll go ahead. I'll create three variables: name, reader, let's say age 24, let's say school year. .2, let's say email, true. So you can actually note that the types of data here are different. So what are these types of data? I'll start with the first one. So any text that is inside a quotation or double quotation is called a string. So I'll go ahead and write string. So any text inside a quotation or double quotation so by quotation we refer to this sign, but by double quotation we refer to can't seem to find it. Yes, I've found it. These are the quotation or single quotation and the double quotation. So down here we have the number, which is 24. So in general, numbers are integers. So they're generally numbers. Then this is 3.2. This is a number, but this is a decimal. So these are basically decimal. These are called float according to the programming terms, but in the layman's language, you refer to it as decimal. Then this refers to true or false, known as booleans. So it is either true. So this only has two values, true or false. So we've said for any text inside a single or double quotation, by single we refer to this and double this, it is a string. This may even include, let me give an example, e.g. even if you put a number inside the double quotation, this is not an integer, it is a string since it is inside the double quotation marks. So if it is only a number, it is an integer. If it's a decimal point, we refer to it as a float. If the value is either true or false, we refer to it as a boolean. So thank you for staying tuned till this far. I'm glad you could join me. I hope you understood. You can repeat the video for as many times as you want. Just make sure that you understand. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. Let's meet in the next episode.